Hey guys, I'm Vanessa Marquez, and I'm going to be talking about the lactate pathway. So, a few weeks ago in CAP number 1, we discussed the energy pathways, especially glycolysis, where it's aerobic energy systems. We know that muscles activity and exercise require ATP, which is provided by the breakdown of glycogen in our skeletal muscles. So today in CAP number 2, I will be discussing the lactate pathway, which is also known as the Cori cycle. Things that will be discussed will be the major steps in that pathway, how the pathway is affected by exercise intensity and training adaptations, how do lactate and lactic acid are different, when can lactic acid be metabolically used, and the consequences of lactate accumulation in our ability to sustain exercise. So why is the lactate pathway important? I think this is a very important topic to discuss before we get into the steps of the lactate pathway. So we know when someone exercises a lot, this could lead to anaerobic metabolism, and this leads to lactic acid production. Someone's exercising too much, they run out of oxygen. So cellular hypoxia is when your body undergoes, they don't have any more oxygen available, and intensive exercise leads to anaerobic metabolism in our muscle. When this occurs, our body shuttles into something called lactic acid. Now, lactic acid is important because it prevents our muscles from becoming too acidic. And when our bodies are too acidic, which is the pH is very low, this could be very dangerous for our bodies. So then the lactate pathway is also known as the Cori cycle. This is the way our body metabolizes lactic acid through this system. So the Cori cycle will remove this lactic acid to prevent your muscles from experiencing a lactic acidosis, meaning too much acid in your body, and it recycles it so our body could actually utilize it for energy. So here we have what the Cori cycle or lactic pathway looks like. So we start off here in our muscles. Glucose will be then converted into pyruvate, and then pyruvate will be converted to lactate. Since lactate is highly acidic, meaning the pH is too low, our body needs to get rid of it. This could be dangerous, like I said earlier. So then this is why our body will re-metabolize the lactate. So it will travel via the blood into the blood and then into the liver. So it goes from the muscle, the blood, and then to the liver. In the liver, this is where it's converted back into pyruvate. And then pyruvate enters a process called glyconeogenesis. This is where the sugar molecules and then glycolysis could occur also again. So then the liver transfers glucose, which is sugar, back into our body. And glucose could be either be stored as glycogen, so we could use it later on, or re-enter the blood again as glucose, so we could go around the cycle again and remetabolize it, and it's just an ongoing circle and a cycle. Cycle continues. So the next thing I'll discuss is how the pathway is affected by exercise intensity and adaptation. So the question is, when does the lactate pathway occur? So muscles require lots of energy. So when intensity is high, you run out of oxygen. This is when this occurs. So this is also known as anaerobic exercise. So this is exercises that are about 85% of your maximum heart rate. So your skeletal muscles are mostly fast twitch fibers. These are going to be those muscle fibers that require low oxygen. These are people who engage in strength training, speed like the 400-meter dash, or they need quick bursts of energy, and these could be also like bodybuilders. So they need quick muscle contraction. high intensity exercises that are also short in durations, about 30 seconds to 2 minutes. So when you're exercising, your breathing rate increases to keep up with the demand for that extra oxygen. But however, if your breathing rate and your blood flow cannot supply enough oxygen for the working muscle and activity that you're engaging in, your body will turn into anaerobic respiration when it runs out of oxygen. So this is when lactic acid occurs. And the system of lactate works by producing the lactic acid to facilitate that energy production, so you can continue to work out. So it's basically the next level before when you run out of oxygen. Okay, so I'm going to discuss the lactate threshold. So what this is I have my whiteboard, and we have a graph that looks like this. So here we have blood, your lactate. Okay. And then you have your intensity of exercise. Okay. So as exercise intensity increases, so it kind of looks like this, it's going up, your blood lactate also goes up. It's going to look something like this. So your blood, as the intensity increases, which will be about right here, this is where your lactate threshold occurs. Lactate threshold. Okay. So your body goes into a certain point where the anaerobic threshold, and we cannot no longer clear that lactic acid. This is where lactic acid occurs. As exercise intensity increases, so does the blood lactate levels. So during training that is highly intense, you can also improve your lactate threshold. So instead of the lactate threshold occurring here, what we want to do is make it occur later on in intensity. So maybe here. So that's how you could move that threshold higher, by engaging in maybe high interval training to increase your VO2 max, higher intensity, and you could train your body that way so that you don't fatigue as quickly. So on the next slide for training adaptations. So there becomes a point where the lactic acid starts to build up, which I discussed in the previous slide, then that's the lactate threshold. So your body can build a better tolerance for the effects of lactic acid over time by training it. You could train it it's called lactate threshold training. So anaerobic training improves your muscles and allows your muscles to have the ability to work in the presence of lactate. So instead of fatiguing sooner, you could fatigue later on. You could still have the effects of lactate, but it won't damage your muscles as much and affect your performance. So then your body's more equipped to handle the lactic acid and utilize it as well in the bloodstreams. So we could increase the lactate threshold by training it more, which I discussed. Trained athletes have a much better tolerance for this lactic acid, and therefore they can continue to exercise effectively, and it won't really affect their performance. Okay, so the question was, can we use lactate as a fuel source? Absolutely, yes, you can. Your body can use lactate as a fuel source, and that occurs when you improve your lactate threshold, which I discussed earlier too as well. This, the use of lactic as fuel within the muscles varies on how well a person's endurance muscle fibers are trained anaerobically. Lactate can be sent to the brain and also to the heart as fuel and to the liver to be converted to glucose so that you could use it as energy. How do lactic and lactic acid different? How are they different? You'll often hear lactic acid and lactate when used interchangeably through with your trainers or maybe like some coaches, and people assume that they're the same thing, but they're not. So we have lactate, which is produced by the body in response to aerobic exercises with oxygen and serves as fuel for your muscles to delay fatigue, to prevent injury. So it's actually a good thing. That's why your body produces it. And then you have lactic acid. So basically, they're the same thing. If you look at them chemically here, they're the same thing, except the lactic acid has an extra proton, which is the hydrogen. So in the body, it dissociates this hydrogen, and then this is what makes lactate. So it's not, and lactic acid is also, it's not produced by the body at all during exercise. Lactate is lactic acid. You want to remember this. Lactate is lactic acid, except it's missing that one proton, which is hydrogen. So once it, you want to remember that the body produces lactate and uses lactate, but it doesn't use lactic acid. So the consequences of lactate accumulation in our body and ability to sustain exercise. So this graph here looks similar to the lactate threshold. So we have lactate threshold down here in blue, and you have the onset of blood lactate accumulation right here. It's a little higher, and this occurs at 4 moles liter of lactate. This OBLA is a point in which lactate starts to accumulate in the blood. The blood lactate concentration increases to 4 millimoles. So the higher intensity, the lactate production exceeds the rate, so it cannot be broken down anymore. This accumulates in the muscles. So when the onset of blood lactate accumulation occurs, the plasma changes in pH. There's bicarbonates present, and the hydrogen concentration and also carbon dioxide production occurs there. So when the hydrogen interferes with its energy production and the muscle concentration, this can be the consequence, because now the muscles are fatigued. They can't perform as well. And that is actually, the way I learned it is you have your lactate threshold and then you have your onset of blood lactate. This is the final, the step that your body goes. Once that occurs, that it's, your muscles are done and they actually are fatigued. When you have lactate threshold, you could actually go, your intensity is gonna decrease, but you could still perform. So like I wrote here, it occurs after the threshold. It's the second increase of that blood lactate. So when the onset of blood lactate occurs, it's going to prevent cross bridges for muscle contraction, so your muscles can no longer contract. Your oxygen consumption and ventilation, so your breathing and the rate of oxygen you're consuming, is going to accumulate as well. Here are my references, and that was it for the lactate pathway. I hope it was informational and I explained things well, and yeah, thank you.